Hello, this is Richard Pearce from Finextra TV, and I'm joined today by David Patterson, who's the Head of Conservation Intelligence at WWF. Hi, David.
Hi, Richard.
Thanks for all your help leading into SF.Live and the event this week. Tell me, coming into the event, what was it you were hoping to achieve by contributing to it?
Well, I think anything we can do in some small way to catalyze the field is good, and I think that was basically the overarching goal for me personally. I think we're at WWF, we're in a bit of a unique position in the space in that we're quite free to talk to multiple actors in the space. So over the last 4 or 5 years, whilst we've been working in spatial finance, we've been having conversations with lots of different people. And I really wanted to show how much of a jigsaw puzzle is already out there, what all these different people are doing, and kind of make it simpler for people to understand how these things might connect up together, and kind of reveal the landscape of what's already happening, because so much is already happening, but it's kind of masked in different areas and different terminology.
Yeah, and so, I mean, as you say, you're an authority on spatial finance. You've obviously written this paper with the World Bank, but when you deal with such a diverse group of people, what's the good and the bad of that in terms of the diverse community that we had at SustainableFinance.live?
Well, I think first of all, spatial finance is a huge field, right? It involves so many different disciplines and needs to involve so many different disciplines. From climate change scientists to environmental experts to data scientists to machine learners to lawyers to the list is huge, right, of the potential scope of the field. And so no single person can really be the spatial finance expert, right? You need a lot of different disciplines, you need a lot of different inputs. And so for me, I spend a lot of time, with the World Bank paper, we think about these ideas, but they need to be tested by people with expertise in very specific domains. And so coming into the event where you can have that expertise across a broad range of things is fabulous. It gets to test those ideas. And ideas are cheap. You can have 1,000 ideas before breakfast. So getting the right people in the room to test them speeds up the process so much, rather than us just running with ideas which maybe could quite easily be improved with someone with the right expertise.
Yeah, and if you think about the sort of top 3 points that you'd like people to remember from what you've contributed to the event, what would that be? I mean, one of them I'm sure is going to be the URL to your paper, but you tell me.
I think for me personally, as a conservationist, there's only really one message I would have, which is the climate and biodiversity crisis is urgent and it needs to be addressed. So how are we going to address that crisis in the time frame that we have, which is very, very narrow? Really we need to get going 2-3 years. We need to be doing stuff right now. And spatial finance for me is fascinating because it could genuinely help us address the environmental and climate crisis, in that if we have better transparency and better accountability on what states are doing, what companies are doing, and what individual assets are doing, then we can change the flow of finance to those assets and to those companies and to those states, and we can see real change in what we're doing to the climate and environment. And realistically, if we think about, oh well, how are we going to change capitalism, or do these things quickly, we're not going to dismantle capitalism in the next 2 years, 3 years, 10 years. So we need to find these kind of extra ways. So for me, spatial finance isn't like a poor cousin to ESG or this new niche thing. It's the next evolution of ESG, which is really more about global accounting and proper accounting of what's going on than it is. And for me, that's why it's interesting and so important, is basically for what I see is incredibly important, the biodiversity and climate crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Sort of building a planetary computer that allows us to do the triple bottom line accounting. That sounds like the dream I'm aiming for as well. There were a lot of other people contributing. What did you take away from any of the other sessions that you were able to join or presentations?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is how much energy there is. There's a lot of energy from a lot of very smart people who are doing some amazing stuff, very niche things like we saw in agriculture, to what some of the bigger players are doing and beginning to think about. I think the other side of that is the challenges are not minor. You know, it's kind of like in my mind, I had the kind of vision that there's a lot of problems here. You know, it's like when you buy a house you need to renovate, right? You walk around as a non-expert, or you have a little bit of an idea, and you're like, this needs some work, and then you get an expert in, and they're like, oh well, you know, the plumbing's terrible, the roof's terrible, you know, and more and more experts you come in, it makes you think through these issues of how serious they are and how they need to be addressed. But at the same time, with those experts, you can overcome that. So it's that crystallization of the problem. So I think that has been really useful, crystallizing problems down from experts, and hopefully for moving forward.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think yeah, we need a good foreman to make sure that we're all renovating the house in the same direction. That's probably one of the biggest
yeah,
factors.
definitely.
And just sort of finally, if you think about what next, you've written a great paper. Everybody was very positive about it as helping them organise their thinking, particularly around the asset theme, which led through the paper. We spoke then in the workshop about building a database to actually allow us to see the world's assets. But that was, and we'll try and pursue that forward. What do you think we need to be doing next through this sort of engagement of experts, either new topics or just drilling further down into what we focused on?
Well, I guess I'm very biased. I'm always going to look at about what for me is next. So I can answer to that. I don't think I can speak for the whole community. But for me, I think there's an interesting, what's the next report going to be? Should we do a case study? Should we look at the FTSE 100? Should we pull 5 companies from the FTSE 500 and see, oh, how far could I get? I know I could do a fairly good assessment of BP or Glencore. What could other people do? Is that of interest? Do we need to lean out to someone, a reinsurer, and try and test the idea of a data exchange, how it might work? Those kind of could we do a new kind of report testing ideas, exploration kind of research? And then there is, of course, the setting up of the marketplace, which is or setting up of standards. And there's an interrelated one, which is the marketplace, but also there's a movement now with the NGOs of tidying up their data world, which is APIs and the API management, and they kind of connected as well. So I think there's that kind of research, and then there's that kind of practical, okay, how do we get started with that? And those conversations of how do we get started is a little bit about funding and a little bit about which approach are we going to take. If we go down the route of doing a commercial data exchange, then it's going to be very different than if we do a non-profit one. And there's advantages and disadvantages to both, or whatever approach we take. There's advantages and disadvantages. But yeah, so we need to, I think, just keep the ball rolling and see what happens. And as you say, we need a foreman or someone to help structure this and lead this. But for me, the critical thing is the time, right? We don't have forever. So normally we would just say, well, let's organically wait for this to develop, let the markets take over, and it will develop over 5-10 years. But for me, there's this rush. So how do we rush this through quickly and efficiently?
Absolutely, 100% agree with that. Well, we had the wash-up meeting with everybody today, and everybody's ready, sleeves rolled up, new year, straight on to the next action call. So we're going to do that. Listen, David, for now, thanks so much for your help and everything you contributed. You and Suzanne have been stars. And thanks to the WWF for sparing your time with us today as well. So for now, have a peaceful break, and we'll get back at it in the new year.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you.